Nothing can quite make people understand the horrors that are occurring in our own country as a consequence of the President's family separation policy than hearing the individual stories of Central American children. So I'd like to briefly talk about Jose, Olivia, and their sons, Mateo and Andre, who came to the U.S. from El Salvador seeking refuge from gang violence and extortion. A close friend was killed by the same gang threatening Jose and Olivia when he was unable to pay them. So fearing for their lives and the lives of their children, Jose and Olivia joined a caravan of asylum seekers and traveled for a month through Mexico to reach the border. Upon arrival, they presented their papers and their children's birth certificates, proving their familial relationship to avoid agent suspicion that Jose was a smuggler paired with children that were not his. Regardless, U.S. authorities separated the family and sent Mateo, only 1 year old at the time, to a facility 1,500 miles away. Olivia and Andre awaited news of Mateo's status from a migrant shelter in Mexico. When Olivia called the facility where Mateo was being held, she was told he was doing fine with no further information on his well-being, and certainly they wouldn't allow her to speak with her son. She was reunited with Mateo finally after 85 days. According to her testimony, she said that after reuniting with her toddler, quote, "He continued to cry when we got home, and he would hold on to my leg and would not let me go. When I took off his clothes, he was full of dirt and lice. It seemed like they had not bathed him in the 85 days he was away from us." And that's a quote. Obviously, this is child abuse. It's unconscionable and should not have happened. So I recently introduced the Central America Family Protection and Reunification Act with Representatives Torres and Espaillat, who are both members of this committee. And this would require the State Department, through our embassies in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, to play a much more active role in supporting Central American governments and parents on family reunification. Ambassador Merton, let me ask you, can you please tell us what our embassies in these countries are doing to support family reunification, if anything?
Thanks for the question, Representative Engel. What we are doing in Central America, we have a Central America strategy which seeks to get at the root causes of migration, to hopefully give people less of a reason to want to leave their country in the first place. And our efforts have been really focused on implementing that strategy, particularly in the Northern Triangle. We're looking at using tools to eliminate corruption that allow a climate of impunity for those who seek to abuse people. We are supporting law enforcement activities through our partners in the region. We are working to help them improve their judicial systems so that criminals can be put away in a clear and transparent way according to local laws. We are working to help these countries grow their economies. And we believe that addressing these issues will really obviate the need for these kind of, that drive people to want to leave their countries and force them into situations like you just described.
But our embassies, specifically, our embassies helping to reunite families, are embassies playing any role in that, in the reunification?
You know, at the risk of misleading you, I'd rather take that question back and get back with an answer to you. I don't want to give you an answer which is incorrect.
Thank you, because that's what our bill, our legislation does. It involves the embassies, which makes sense to me, because anything we can do to help expedite this would be good. Ms. Lynch, our legislation also requires a State Department strategy to address pervasive gender-based violence in the Northern Triangle. Can you please describe the impact of gender-based violence, and specifically domestic violence, on women in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras?
Thank you for the question. Yes, all of our activities in the Northern Triangle are based at focusing on the root causes of illegal migration. And certainly we work on the security front as well as governance and prosperity. So this would fall into that security front and governance as well, whereby we just find the gender-based violence, the rates that you see in the Northern Triangle are just horrific. So what we do is we incorporate women as well as other marginalized communities that suffer as well at higher rates than others of violence. We incorporate them into all of our programming, and that means on the governance front, making sure there's legislation that addresses these issues. On the citizen front, making sure that there's citizen awareness and that there is the capacity of certain civil society organizations to address those issues. And in addition, prosperity, economic opportunity is really what gives these women power and control over their lives. So specifically with all of our programming that involves increased jobs and economic growth, we involve women in marginalized communities to the fullest extent.
Well, thank you. Let me just say that given the pervasiveness of domestic violence in the Northern Triangle and the low rates of prosecution for these horrific crimes, it's really horrifying that Attorney General Sessions says he'll no longer allow these crimes to be grounds for asylum. I just think that's a very bad thing. And finally, let me piggyback on the chairman has talked a lot about Cuba and our embassy officials being targeted. One of the things that I've called for is to have the CDC, to involve the CDC, why has the administration, referring to the health, well, let me just say this, why has not the CDC yet been deployed to Cuba? It certainly seems to me that we should, if we're really going to get to the bottom of it, and I just don't understand why that hasn't happened. Does anyone have any insight into that for me?
Thanks very much. Yes, one of the things that we have done in the past month or so is the Secretary Pompeo has asked that Deputy Secretary Sullivan chair a task force to look at these incidents, both in China and the attacks in Cuba. And this task force is chaired by the Deputy Secretary. He participates in it. I participate in it, representing the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. We also have, once a week, a meeting of the task force with the interagency community. And in that community, CDC is present. And they are an active member of that community, of the interagency community that participates in this task force. I don't know if they have plans to travel yet, but I think their involvement in this is relatively recent. But I think there's a possibility that they could become more involved. Wouldn't be appropriate for me to really explain what their plans are to do, but they are participating now in this interagency task force. So as I said, we remain very concerned about this, and I think we're looking for any tools we can find to really get to the bottom of what's causing this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and Mr. Engel and I